Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. This might be one of the most frequent questions that I get across DMs on Twitter and Instagram, questions on comments sections, so I thought I'd do a video on it. How to discover new music and artists that you've never listened to before. What are some of the strategies that you need to go through in order to get out of the echo chamber of major publications, to try and get out of those circles that only talk about specific kinds of artists. I'm going to give a couple of examples of the things that I do to try and really widen out my music discovery, but I also want to know what you guys do. Do you have a secret formula to certain things that you do, or specific publications that you read, or where do you go off the beaten track to find these interesting artists? Share your secrets. And this isn't just about finding brand new music, of course. It's also about finding those artists that you've never heard of before that have this wealth of incredible material, or maybe just like one seminal record and it's just passed you by, and then you listen to it and you think, how have I gone this long without listening to this artist before? In fact, I remember discovering Glenn Branca for the first time when I was reading a Sonic Youth write-up on some website, and there was a throwaway line about the no wave scene in New York, and there I discovered Glenn Branca, I discovered DNA, Lydia Lunch, and I'm thinking, wow, how I never listened to any of this music before? How has this completely passed me by? And that's the power of doing research, using all this media to your disposal to make sure you're finding artists that you might love, that you might not have known about otherwise. But it's all just noise sometimes, isn't it? It's really hard to break down and work out what you need to listen to, who you need to listen to. And I actually did a video on music fatigue, which I'll link in the description if you want to watch that, because it's a slightly different part of this conversation, really. But here are some of the resources that I employ to find new music. There might be no better way of improving your musical journey of discovery than just immersing yourself in a book. There are so many, there's a wealth of music books out there, so many great ones, some shit ones. Definitely, I've picked up a couple where I've gone, whoa, what are you talking about and why is it written like this? There's been a few of those, specifically in the 33 1/3 series, if you've ever seen those, and that each book focuses on a record. And sometimes they're a bit hit and miss. But for the most part, you can find such comprehensive books that are so well laid out and detailed on their specific subject matter. And often they contain insights that you're not going to get in a listicle or a quickly written up review on a website. I'm going to do a proper music book video at some point because it's another one that you keep asking for all the time. But I'm just going to go through a couple of the books that I really like that have opened up my eyes to different parts of the music world. So this one I've talked about loads. Ted Giola's History of Jazz. Now, I got this and it's been a constant resource for me ever since. I've discovered some amazing albums, like Symbiosis by Bill Evans. I'd never listened to that part of Bill Evans' discography before, and it completely blew me away. Like the stuff that he's doing on that album, just amazing. Also, Ahmad Jamal, who I talked about in the Miles Davis guide. I started listening to some of Ahmad Jamal's stuff, and I realised why Miles Davis wanted his pianists in some of those early records to sound like Ahmad Jamal. And that came from me finding that out in this book. This is like, how long is it? Well, about 400 pages long. You don't have to read it start to finish. And that's another thing about really good music books. Sometimes you can use them as a bit of a reference. You don't need to necessarily read every single page, because that is going to take a long time. And let's be honest, they've got other things to do as well. So, there's a couple of different bookmarks in there of places that I want to return to at some point. An absolutely incredible resource. And if you want to get into jazz music, and he sensitively writes about jazz, and not in a way that tries to put off outsiders. It's well written, it's comprehensive, and it wants you to come into this world and start discovering this music with him. So definitely have a look at that. This is one that I've only just finished, and it's slightly different. So this is Kim Gordon's autobiography on her time in Sonic Youth and her dissolution with Thurston Moore, and kind of how the band broke up after they split up. And this is a different way of reading about music because it's autobiographical. It means you get a different insight. Maybe it's not going to meticulously detail every single little part about the music and talk about the wider period in loads and loads of detail, but you can sometimes find more out about an artist's or a musician's insights than you could if you got it from an external critic. So I think that autobiographies are a great way of doing that. And this was a quick, I read this in like a day and a half because I was just so hooked. And I've read loads about Sonic Youth in the past, but this really hit the spot for me. I felt like I learned more than I ever knew before. And I will be doing a Sonic Youth guide this year because I'm going to use some of the stuff I've learned in this. And David Toop, that's another one, Ocean of Sound. So this is a slightly more academically written book, I suppose. You know, he takes on some of the sciences of music. He talks about the history of music and where different genres have been influenced by other genres, you know, how ambient music came about. This is a complete gem, and there's quite a few books like this that I've really enjoyed. I haven't completely got through all of this yet. I'm still working my way through it. Yeah, I often put music books up and put them back down again, and if the artists that I've found out about in them I've really enjoyed, then I may go back to them again. But I definitely recommend checking this out. You can pick it up, you know, pretty cheaply as well. I've also got one on order which I wanted to show today and it hasn't arrived yet, but it's David Keenan's England's Hidden Reverse, which is a history of bands like Coil, Current 93 and Nurse with Wound. I've been wanting to check that out for ages, but it's out of print, so I've had to spend like 25 quid on it, but I hope that'll be worth it. But yeah, I think books can be such a brilliant resource. You can take your time with them. They're going to have detailed insights that other articles online aren't necessarily going to have. But again, I want to know what your favourite music books are. You know, tell me. The best print resource you're going to find for underground music, Wire Magazine's been around since 1982, and it brings together all of the underground music that may have passed you by. And I'm talking about music concrete, electronic, experimental, jazz. Everything you could possibly think of is detailed in this. You've got a really comprehensive review section every single month, which is really helpful to try and find opinions on some of these artists and bands that may not be getting a look in other music publications. You have some really in-depth interviews as well. I mean, this specific one was their Albums of the Year list, and there was some great stuff on there that a lot of other publications weren't even talking about. They also often come with Tapper CDs, I think it's quarterly, and it gives you a mix of some of the artists that they're talking about that you're not going to get to hear elsewhere, because again, a lot of the artists they cover in this you'll find aren't on streaming services. You have to find them on places like Bandcamp or pay for the albums directly through their websites, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because you're supporting the artist directly. So this is a good way of finding some of those other artists. You're not going to find them on streaming services. They're not going to come up in a Spotify Discover playlist. They just aren't. So I would absolutely recommend checking out Wire Magazine. If you're in another country and it's expensive to be shipped, then you can get a digital copy as well. And their website doesn't really get updated that much, so you're not going to find a great deal on their website. But I would absolutely recommend this magazine to anybody who wants to branch out that music listening discovery, especially if you want to go a little bit more underground with what you're discovering. And again, what I really like about Wire is that they talk about music outside of the Western sphere, and it never feels tokenistic. You know, all music is equal in the eyes of the Wire staff, and I really love that. And that's a really great opportunity for you to start listening to music from around the world and get out of that Western bubble. When I started to realise the importance of labels, and not just mainstream labels, but DIY labels, underground labels, my discovery of music really kicked into overdrive. First off, most social media savvy labels are going to be constantly talking across social media about what's coming up, what's going to be released, what you need to look out for, great reissues as well. So you don't have to have some kind of really anal spreadsheet with all the releases that you want to check out, because you're going to be following those labels and they're going to be telling you what's coming out. So I find that to start off with really helpful in the first place. And if you really start to dig into some of these DIY labels that are floating around right now, you're going to find some fantastically curated selections of music that you may not find otherwise. Orange Milk Records is one that springs to mind, an experimental future electro vaporwave label from Ohio with some of the most interesting artwork you're going to find anywhere. It's this pretty out there stuff. I mean, I discovered KNV for the first time because of this, and Bin Asu was one of my favourite records of 2016. I still love it. Charles Barabe, Giant Claw, Footman. I mean, all these artists I wouldn't have found if I hadn't stumbled on the label, followed the label, and kept up to date with what they were releasing. Or Hubro, the experimental jazz ambient label from Norway. I've talked about them quite a lot on this channel since 2016. And ever since I've stumbled onto this label, I always find something great to listen to. Be that Mats Ilertsen, Splash Girl, Moon Relay. These bands I think have changed the way I listen to music in some ways. So I have that label to thank. And I don't think if the label was as well curated as it was, I would have ever found them in the first place. And of course you have legendary labels like Warp, who have artists on their roster like Aphex Twin and Autechre. But what's great about following them, especially Warp, because they're quite forward thinking, they are going to be adding new artists to their roster all the time. So if you like those artists, chances are you're going to find some brand new artists who are in that same genre, you know, if not sounding the same, because who's going to sound the same as Autechre? Hardly anyone. But you may find new artists because you're following those labels of artists that you already really like. There are probably a billion blogs out there that focus on music, and where do you even start? This is the problem. But to my mind, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that do one specific thing very, very well. Take Gorilla vs. Bear, for example. They think they started in 2005. I've been following him since 2008. And I've found so many artists from them. Glass Candy, Jesse Lanza, Abra, Chromatics. If you've heard of any of those artists, you'll probably realise this blog pretty much specialises in sort of dreamy electro-pop or future electro-pop sounds. And that's exactly what they do. And because I know what the blog specialises in, I know when I'm going there what sort of sounds I'm going to get. I know if they're really pushing a new artist, whether I'm going to like them or not, pretty much. And I love that that's a resource that is out there to use. And I'd love to know about more of those kind of blogs with specific genres to focus on. And hopefully you can help me with that. You know, if you know a really great death metal blog that does exactly the same thing, I'd love to know about it. I really would. Sadly, a lot of the best blogs have fallen by the wayside because of financial issues. It's very expensive to keep a blog going and keep the content at a consistent quality. You know, I think about what happened to Pigeons and Planes. They got swallowed by Complex. Let's not talk about the diminishing quality of Pitchfork ever since Condé Nast took over. So there are a lot of them have fallen by the wayside. But there are some shining beacons of light. To my mind, The Quietus is still one of the best websites on the internet to cover music. It does it comprehensively. It does it intelligently. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I still have a soft spot for Tiny Mixtapes as well. I think I've discovered lots of artists through them. A platform that's evolved heavily since it hit the scene all those years ago. It's now a one-stop shop for any kind of genre you can think of. You want experimental, go there. You want metal, go there. You want backpacker rap, you want vaporwave, you go there. And it's also got some excellent, surprisingly excellent actually, it was surprising for me, the editorial content that's put on the site. You know, the lists that they do, the lists that they recently did about albums of the year were very strong. You know, there's a lot of great stuff on there now. I'm so impressed at how the platform's evolved. And one of the most important things is artists can get a look in and gain an audience and a fan base without having to rely on marketing in the same kind of way. You know, their albums of the year lists highlighted some artists that no other publications were highlighting. And I really like that because it means these artists have an opportunity to build that fan base, and you're being part of that if you're on that website. And it also means that if you're going to buy the album off Bandcamp, you're directly giving those musicians that money, and you're doing it in a pain-free way because you're not having to wait for an album to be shipped, and you know that the money isn't nefariously being used for other things. I mean, I've released music on Bandcamp before, and I know for a fact that most of the money goes to the artist, which is great. It's ethical. You're supporting musicians, and you're finding out about some brilliant bands and artists you've never heard of before. One of the best things you can do is just pick one of the genres in the tabs on the homepage and then just click through. Just keep going until you find maybe an album art you like, click on it, take a listen, and you may find your new favourite artist. You never know. This one very much depends on where you live, obviously, and this is a particularly anecdotal one, but there are two venues in Kent who have been fantastic in terms of highlighting new artists and helping me discover new music. So we have the Ramsgate Music Hall, which is unsurprisingly in Ramsgate, run by a guy called Andre Dack, and he's been running it for a few years. And some of the artists that he's brought down to that venue, I mean, is astonishing. He brought Stereolab down last year. He had Daughters there. You know, he had the Utopia Strong, which was a band I'd never heard of before, saw that he was getting them for the venue, checked them out, and was really impressed by it. And we have Elsewhere in Margate who've put on bands like Squid and Black Country New Road, and are hopefully convincing people that live in the local area that support these local venues to go out and listen to these bands, enjoy them a lot, and then go and check out their music and then hopefully support them financially too. I know obviously that is a much more anecdotal example, but some of you might have really well curated music venues in your area that you haven't checked out for whatever reason, or you don't know about. And if you do find out, you may have discovered some new artists in the live setting that you then take through to their studio recordings, and you become a lifelong fan. So let us know, in the comment section, put some of those venues down that you really appreciate. And you never know, other people in the comment section might live in a similar area and find a new place. Now, they are just some of the strategies that I employ, but I want to know what you use to find out about new music. Is it a special type of blog? Is it a YouTube channel? Don't talk about Fantano though. None of that here, thank you very much. I'm joking, I love him. But maybe use Spotify Discovery. I know a lot of people do. I personally don't really like Spotify Discovery because I think it's a bit of an echo chamber and I don't tend to find loads of artists I haven't heard of. But some of you might use that to great effect, so let me know. Are there music documentaries that you have found that have completely blown your music listening experience wide open? Personally, I think music documentaries leave a lot to be desired, and there's never really been one that I've absolutely loved. And as such, I hope in the future that Deep Cuts can be part of creating some of those documentaries, because I think there's a lot of bands and artists and genres of music that need proper, full-scale, full production documentaries on them. But yeah, you might have some of those that you know of and you want to share, so please share with us. Thanks for watching. Let's chat in the comments section, and I'll be back next week with a guide to Miles Davis Part 2. See you then.